Good morning, everyone. Come on in, find a seat. Don't worry if it's a bit crowded today. These things always draw a crowd when we start talking about something as everyday as energy. Back in the early 60s, you couldn't pick up a newspaper without reading about atomic power plants promising electricity too cheap to meter, or new cars guzzling gasoline like there was no tomorrow, or how the lights in your house run on wires carrying this mysterious stuff from distant dams or coal fires. People talked about energy as if it was some kind of invisible fuel you pour into things, or a force that pushes and pulls, or something that gets used up when you burn gasoline in your Chevy or flip on the radio. But here's the thing, most of what you've heard, and probably most of what you've thought about energy your whole life, misses the real picture. It's not quite like that at all. Let me try to explain it the way nature actually shows it to us step by step, without any fancy words or tricks. We'll keep it simple, like we're sitting around figuring out how the world ticks. Because the truth is, energy isn't a thing you can grab hold of like a block of wood or a gallon of gas. It's more like a number we invent. A very clever number that stays exactly the same no matter what happens in a closed-up piece of the world, as long as nothing sneaks in or out. Imagine a little kid, something like that mischievous character Dennis the Menace from the comics everybody reads these days. This kid has a bunch of indestructible toy blocks, let's say 28 of them, all the same size and weight. His mother is very strict about counting them every afternoon when he goes to bed. She comes in, and no matter what the room looks like, blocks scattered on the floor, some stacked in towers, some hidden under the rug, she always counts 28. One day the kid throws a block into the dirty bathtub. The mother can't see it anymore, but the water level rises a little bit. She notices that for every block dunked in the tub, the water goes up exactly a quarter of an inch. So she adds that to her count. Visible blocks plus the rise in water level divided by a quarter inch. Then the kid starts hiding blocks in his toy box, which is locked. The mother weighs the box. Each block weighs 3 ounces, so she figures out how many are inside by the extra weight. Pretty soon her counting rule gets complicated. Number of blocks she can see plus weight of the box minus its empty weight divided by 3 ounces plus water height minus the normal level divided by a quarter inch, and so on for every hiding spot. But amazingly, no matter how wild the kid gets, building forts, splashing in the tub, inviting his friend Bruce over, who sometimes brings his own blocks, and takes some away, the total always comes out to 28 if she accounts for everything cleverly. Now here's the punchline. In the end, after all these adjustments, there aren't really any blocks left in the formula. It's just a bunch of measurements added up in a funny way that always gives the same number. The blocks themselves disappeared from the picture. What remains is this constant quantity she can calculate. That's exactly what energy is like in the real world. We don't have little blobs of energy floating around that we can point to. Instead, different ways of figuring out a number depending on what's happening, how high something is, how fast it's moving, how hot things are, how stretched a spring is, and when we add all those pieces together properly, the total is always the same in a system where nothing enters or leaves. It's a bookkeeping trick that nature forces on us, but it's the most reliable one we've ever found. No exceptions as far as we know, and we've looked pretty hard since the days when people first puzzled over steam engines and falling weights. So why do so many people get it wrong? They think energy is some kind of pushy force or fuel that burns away and disappears. You hear it all the time: the car uses up energy when you drive it, or we need more energy to power the country. But energy doesn't get used up, it just changes from one form to another. The gasoline in your tank has chemical energy stored in the way its molecules are arranged. When you burn it in the engine, that chemical energy turns into heat, making the gases expand fast and push the pistons. The heat becomes motion energy in the car speeding down the road. Some turns into sound from the exhaust, some into electricity for the lights and radio, and a lot gets wasted as heat warming the air in the radiator. But if you could add up every last bit, the motion, the heat, the tiny amounts lost here and there, the total stays the same as what was in the gasoline plus whatever came from the air it mixed with. Nothing vanishes, it just spreads out in different disguises. Think about a pendulum swinging back and forth on a string like the big ones. They sometimes hang in science museums, or even in old grandfather clocks. At the highest point, the bob is way up. It has a lot of what we call gravitational energy because gravity wants to pull it down. As it swings down, that gravitational energy turns into motion energy. The faster it goes, the more motion energy it has. At the bottom, it's moving quickest. All the gravitational energy has become motion. Then it climbs up the other side. Motion energy turns back into gravitational, and it stops at almost the same height it started from. If there's no friction rubbing it away as heat in the air or the string, the total gravitational plus motion stays constant the whole time. That's why it keeps swinging for so long before it slowly dies down. Or take something more everyday, a kid on a swing in the park. You push once to get started, that adds some motion energy. Then gravity and the chains do the rest, trading back and forth between height and speed. Yep. If the chains were perfect and there was no air drag, the swing would go forever at the same height. But in real life, a little energy leaks out as heat from rubbing and wind. So you have to push again now and then. Still, the conservation holds if you count the heat too. Now let's list some of the main forms this number can take, so you see how versatile it is. First, gravitational energy. Anything higher up has more of it. A rock on a cliff has more than the same rock at the bottom, because it can fall and do work, smash something, turn a water wheel, whatever. The higher it is, or the heavier, the more it can do when it drops. We figure it roughly as weight times height above some level we choose, like the ground. Then motion energy, what we call kinetic. A moving thing has it. A fast baseball has more than a slow one. And it's not just twice as much when you double the speed, it's 4 times as much. That's why a car going twice as fast takes 4 times longer to stop if you slam the brakes. Or why crashes at highway speeds are so much worse than at city speeds. Drop something from twice the height, it hits twice as fast, but with 4 times the smash, because the motion energy squares with speed. Heat is another big one. It's really just motion energy on a tiny scale. Atoms and molecules jiggling around faster when something's hot. In a cup of coffee, the molecules bounce harder than in cold milk. When you rub your hands together on a chilly morning in winter, you feel warmth because friction makes the surface molecules jiggle more. That's mechanical motion turning into heat. Engines waste a lot this way. Only a fraction of the gasoline's chemical energy ends up pushing the car forward. The rest heats the exhaust and the radiator. Release it and it turns back into motion, like a slingshot shooting a pebble, or a bow firing an arrow. Chemical energy in food, in batteries and gasoline. It's stored in the way atoms stick together or pull apart. When you digest food or burn fuel, those arrangements rearrange, releasing energy mostly as heat and motion. Electrical energy, charges moving in wires, lighting bulbs or running your television set. In the 50s and 60s, with all the new transistors replacing vacuum tubes, radios got smaller and used less battery power, but it's still the same kind of energy flowing. Radiant energy, light from the sun, or from a light bulb, or radio waves carrying music to your car radiates. Waves or little packets traveling through space. Nuclear energy, deep inside atoms, rearranging the protons and neutrons, releases huge amounts. We saw that dramatically in the war with the big bombs, and now we're trying to control it in reactors to make steam for electricity, like at shipping port or the new plants going up. Even mass itself turns out to be a form of energy from Einstein's idea. Tiny bits of mass in nuclear reactions turn into radiant energy or heat, which is why a little uranium runs a submarine for months. A hydroelectric dam holds water high up, gravitational energy. It falls through turbines, turning into motion of the water, then into spinning the generators, motion again, then into electrical energy sent over wires to your home. There it might heat a toaster, heat, light a bulb, radiant and heat, or run a motor, motion. The total number stays the same throughout, minus tiny leaks to heat in the wires, or friction in the machine. The amazing part is that this rule has held up everywhere we've tested it, from swinging pendulums in the lab, to stars burning in the sky, from chemical reactions in a test tube, to the release inside an atomic nucleus. We've never found a case where the total changes, unless something carries energy across the boundary of whatever we've defined as our system. And that brings us to something deeper. Why does nature make this number stay constant? It's tied to the way time works. The rules don't change from one moment to the next. If experiments tomorrow behave exactly like they do today, that symmetry forces energy to be conserved. It's not something we made up, nature hands it to us. But we'll get into more of that later, how this connects to motion, to gravity in detail, and even to some of the fancy math that describes the paths things take. For now, just hold on to this. Energy isn't stuff. It's not fuel running out. It's a constant number we calculate in clever ways, telling us how much change can happen, how much work can get done, in all the wonderful transformations we see around us every day. Now let's pick up right where we left off. We've seen how this constant number we call energy shows up in all sorts of disguises. Gravity pulling things down, motion pushing them along, heat making atoms dance, and so on. But how do we really know the total stays the same, and why does nature insist on it? To get a better feel for that, let's look closer at gravity first, using some simple machines people played with back in the days when folks were building big dams and launching rockets. Imagine we have machines that lift weights by lowering other weights, like those old pulleys or levers you see in workshops or even in kids' science kits. Suppose we make one that's as perfect as possible. No rubbing, no slipping, no wasted heat. We call it reversible, because if you run it backward, let the lifted weight come down, it should put back exactly what it took to lift something else. No energy lost or gained extra. Now here's a thought experiment. Drop a 1 pound weight 1 foot using this perfect machine. It lifts, say, 3 pounds, some height h on the other side. If h were more than 1/3 foot, you could run the thing over and over, lower the 3 pounds a tiny bit, lift the 1 pound back up higher than before, then use the extra height to do work, like running a little wheel or lighting a bulb. You'd get free energy forever, a perpetual motion machine. But nature doesn't allow that. We've never built one that works, and every clever inventor from the steam age to the space race has failed. So h can't be more than 1/3 foot. In fact, for the perfect machine, it has to be exactly 1/3 foot. Lower 1 pound 1 foot, lift 3 pounds 1/3 foot. The amount traded is the same. 1 times 1 equals 3 times 1. Do this with any weights and heights. The sum of weight times height change stays balanced. If you lower several things different distances, or lift others, the total weight times height before and after is unchanged. We call this gravitational potential energy, the energy stored because things are up high, ready to fall and do work. Near the ground, it's roughly weight times how high above some level we pick, like the floor. The higher or heavier, the more it can give when it drops. This idea stretches to all sorts of machines. An inclined plane. Roll a heavy box up a gentle slope. Instead of lifting straight up, you push less hard but farther. The total work, that weight times distance along the path, matches what a straight lift would take. A screw jack or a gear system does the same trade. More force for less distance or vice versa. But the product stays constant in the ideal case. That's why no clever arrangement lets you beat gravity for free. The bookkeeping always balances. Why does a moving thing carry this energy in a special way? Drop a ball from a certain height. It speeds up as it falls, gaining motion energy, while losing gravitational. At the bottom, if it hits a perfect spring or bounces ideally, it climbs back to the same height. All the motion energy turns back into gravitational. Because to climb twice as high, it needs 4 times the motion energy at the bottom. Think of a pendulum again, or a kid on a swing. From higher release, it swings faster at the bottom, goes higher on the other side. Double the starting height, double the bottom speed, but 4 times the oomph, because the energy of motion grows with the square of the speed. It's not linear like you'd guess from everyday pushes. It's quadratic. Nature squares. A car at 60 miles an hour has 4 times the motion energy of one at 30, takes 4 times the distance to stop, if brakes lock, which is why highway crashes hurt so much more than city one. Fall twice as far, gain twice the speed, but the energy added is force times distance. Gravity's pull times twice the drop, so twice the energy. No, wait. Speed doubles. Energy should quadruple to match the climb back to. Yes, the pull is constant. Distance doubles. Work done, energy gain doubles. But wait, that's inconsistent, unless motion energy squares. It checks out perfectly in experiments, from falling weights in labs to satellites orbiting in the 50s and 60s. So how does nature decide these paths? Why pendulums swing just so, balls roll down hills and curves, planets orbit in ellipses? It turns out there's a deeper rule, one that ties everything together, with a bit of math that feels like advanced calculus, but really isn't so scary when you picture it. Instead, think of every possible crazy path. Straight, zigzag, looping fast, then slow. For each path, we calculate a special number, called the action. It's like adding up energy along the way, but weighted by time. More precisely, it's the difference between motion energy and gravitational, or other potential energy, summed in little bits over the whole trip. Nature adds up contributions from all these paths, but in a funny quantum way. Most cancel each other out like waves interfering, positive and negative. Only paths, very close to one special path, add up instead of canceling. That special path is the one where the action is least, or at least doesn't change much, if you tweak it a tiny bit. It's the stationary path, the one nature chooses, because tiny wiggles make no difference in first order. In everyday life, where things are big and slow, compared to quantum weirdness, this boils down to the path of least action. Light does it too. It takes the path of least time straight in air, bending at water to save time overall, like a lifeguard running then swimming to reach a drowning person quickest. Particles do the same with action instead of time. To picture the calculus without writing it, think of finding the shortest rope hanging between 2 points, under gravity. It sags in a curve called a catenary, or the shape of a soap film, between wires. Minimal area, you guess a curve. Calculate its cost, length, area or action, then tweak it a little, make it bulge more here, less there. If the cost goes down, keep tweaking. If up, go back. When tiny changes make the cost neither rise nor fall, infinitesimal wiggles give zero change. You've found the minimum.
That's calculus of variations in words, hunting the extremum path. Any other curve, higher arc, flatter, would have higher action. Nature sums all paths, but the parabola dominates because neighbors are almost as good, and wild ones cancel. It connects to energy, because the action involves kinetic minus potential. The path balances them so changes cancel. And conservation, if the rules don't change with time. If today's experiment matches tomorrow's, that symmetry forces energy to stay constant. It's like Newton's beautiful idea from the early 20th century. Time symmetry gives energy conservation. Space symmetry gives momentum conservation. Rotate the world, momentum stays the same. In the quantum world, Feynman worked on in the 40s and 50s, drawing those little diagrams for electrons and light. We see paths, adding as arrows, most cancelling, classical path, emerging when quantum effects fade. Energy exchanges in tiny packets, photons popping in and out, but total conserved. So what have we got? Energy isn't a thing. It's this persistent number, calculated cleverly, always balancing in closed systems. Gravity trades with motion via squares and heights. Machines show the limits and the deepest why. Nature picks elegant paths, minimizing action, a principle tying mechanics to light, to quantum strangeness. We poke at the world with pendulums, falling balls, pulleys, and suddenly this abstract number lets us predict stars, atoms, everything from Sputnik beeps to transistor radios. We don't know what energy is any more than we know why time flows forward, but the number works perfectly, every time. That's the wonder of it.